Today we will start our first lecture, Introduction to Biology, Part 1, Levels of Organization of Living Things. Lecture 1. Biology is not a modern or new branch of learning. It is the most ancient of all sciences. Thousands of years before anybody ever thought of algebra, history, or English, early humans were studying nature. Their life depends on accurate knowledge of living things about them. They had to observe and study the habits of animals in order to know which were harmless, which they could capture or successfully fight, and which they must avoid because they might harm or even kill them. They had to know which fruits, leaves, and roots they could eat, which were pleasant to taste, which were not, and which were poisonous. This knowledge of biology of a crude and practical sort, yet it was probably the kind of knowledge that early humans needed most. A knowledge of biology and the uses of such knowledge are necessary now and have been equally so in the past. The word biology is derived from the Greek word bios, meaning life, and logos, meaning study, and is defined as the science of life and living organisms. Now I want you to take a look at the pictures and tell me what is in common these pictures have, besides that this is the color pictures and they are made by the same photographer. So what is an answer? The answer is that all these pictures contain both living and non-living things. What is in common between living and non-living things? All things, both living and non-living, are made of matter. Matter is something that takes up space and has mass. Mass is how much matter in something. The terms mass and weight are used interchangeably in ordinary conversation, but the two words do not mean the same thing. The difference between mass and weight is that mass is the amount of matter in a material, while weight is a measure of how the force of gravity acts upon the mass. Therefore, if you walk on the moon, your weight would be much less than your weight on Earth. Your mass, the amount of matter that is you, would remain the same on the moon as on Earth. What else living and non-living things have in common? Think about it. Well, atoms are the basic units of matter, the building blocks of all substances. Therefore, both living and non-living things are made of atoms. The idea that atom exists goes back as far as early Greeks. Democritus talked about matter being made of invisible units. In early 1800s, John Dalton, an English scientist, formulated his atomic theory to explain the behavior of matter. Both living and non-living things are made of elements. There are 92 naturally occurring elements in the universe. An element is a substance that cannot be separated into a simpler substances purely by chemical means. Although of these 92 elements, only 6, sulfur, phosphorus, oxygen, nitrogen, carbon, and hydrogen, make up living matter. An atom is a part of an element. A particular element is composed of only one type of atom. And yes, I hear you saying, what? The difference between elements and atoms is kind of a slippery idea. But let me explain you the difference so you don't get confused. As you can see on these diagrams, atoms are composed of subatomic particles called electrons, protons, and neutrons. Atoms of an element can exist in different forms. Atoms of the same element may have the same number of protons and electrons by different number of neutrons. These atoms are called isotopes. As an example, let's take a look at the element called carbon. In the periodic table of elements, it is symbolized the way you see it on this slide. Carbon 12, carbon 13, and carbon 14 are isotopes. Carbon 12 has 6 protons and 6 neutrons. Carbon 13 has 6 protons and 7 neutrons. And carbon 14 has 6 protons and 8 neutrons. As a result, they each have a different atomic mass. They are all are the same element, but they are different forms of atom. Carbon 12, 13, and 14. Atoms can form molecules. Molecules are neutral particles made of 2 or more atoms bounded together. We will go back to the topic of molecules, atoms in our future lectures. Now let's take a look at the levels of organization of living things, or a hierarchy of organization of life. Hierarchy means structural levels. First, let's draw a triangle upside down. It would be one of our diagrams that will indicate a hierarchy of life. As we established earlier, living things consist of atoms of different elements. So let's write down atoms at the base of the triangle. The most complex molecules that make us up contain carbon bounded to other elements. Carbon bounded to oxygen, carbon bounded to hydrogen, carbon bounded to nitrogen. Almost everything in our body and the bodies of other animals and plants is made of carbon. For this reason, the life on Earth is known as carbon-based life, or life that contains building blocks that are made of combination of carbon and other elements. 99% of living things are made of hydrogen, oxygen, carbon, sulfur, phosphorus, and nitrogen. People have been known to use the word sponge from the initial letters of their names to remember the 6 elements that make up 99% of living things. Sponge is a popular marshmallow cookies in Mexico. Also, most of the living things is made up of sulfur, phosphorus, oxygen, nitrogen, carbon, and hydrogen. Life depends on other elements also. For example, there could be no photosynthesis without magnesium. And while a pine tree can live without sodium, you cannot, because sodium is necessary for the functioning of your nerves and muscles. In atomic physics, Bohr model, or Rutherford-Bohr model, presented by Niels Bohr and Ernest Rutherford in 1913, is a system consisting of a small dense nucleus surrounded by orbiting electrons. Atoms make up molecules. The atoms of a molecule can be of the same kind or different kinds. That is, they can be the same or different elements. A molecular oxygen consists of 2 oxygen atoms bound tightly together to form molecular oxygen, which is symbolized by the chemical formula O2. The oxygen of air is molecular oxygen or atmospheric oxygen. Hydrogen gas consists of molecular hydrogen, chemical formula H2. And you are undoubtedly aware that 2 atoms of hydrogen and 1 atom of oxygen combine to form 1 molecule of water. Water, by the way, is a compound. What compound means we'll discuss during our future lecture when we will cover chemistry of life. The lecture known as Organic and Inorganic Compounds, lecture number 7. Okay, let's make up a note that atoms make up molecules. Then let's write down the examples of molecules. Molecule of atmospheric oxygen, molecule of hydrogen, molecule of water, molecule of carbon monoxide, molecule of carbon dioxide. What we just put down are examples of inorganic molecules. Yes, there is 2 types of molecules, inorganic molecules and organic molecules. Organic compounds and inorganic compounds form the basics of chemistry. The primary difference between inorganic versus organic compounds is that organic compounds always contain carbon, while most inorganic compounds do not contain carbon. Exceptions are carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide. Even though they contain carbon, they are considered inorganic compounds. Also, nearly all organic compounds contain carbon-hydrogen bonds. The word organic was originally used in 18th century chemists to describe substances obtained from living sources such as plants and animals. However, now we know that organic compounds can be made from inorganic compounds without living matter, thought to be the vital force for their synthesis. Examples of organic compounds are sugars, amino acids, glycerol, fatty acids, nitrogenous bases. On this slide, you can see a glycerol molecule. Each of the lines you see is a representation of bonds between carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen atoms. Glycerol is a naturally occurring alcohol. It is an odorless liquid that is used as a solvent, sweetening agent, and also as medicine. When glycerol is in the intestines, it attracts water into the gut, softening stools and relieving constipation. Looking at the molecule of methionine, you again see a backbone of carbon. It is connecting to the hydrogen, nitrogen, and sulfur atoms. Methionine is an amino acid. Amino acids are building blocks that our body uses to make proteins. Methionine is found in meat, fish, and dairy products. It plays an important role in many functions within the body. And here is another organic compound, a molecule of fatty acid. Again, here is the carbon backbone. A fatty acid is a carboxylic acid. Most naturally occurring fatty acids have a branch chain of an even number of carbon atoms. Fatty acids make up lipids such as fats and oils. Organic compounds make up biopolymers, also known as macromolecules. Macro means large. So, biological molecules. Molecules that make up large biological structures. There are 4 types of biopolymers that we're going to look at during this course, and that is proteins, carbohydrates, lipids, and nucleic acids. Biopolymers make up organelles. Organelle is a specialized subunit, usually within a cell, that has a specific function. And examples of organelles are mitochondria, ribosomes, nuclei, chloroplasts. The name organelle comes from the idea that these structures are part of cells as organs are part of the body. Hence, organelle, the suffix -ily, being diminutive. Cells contain variety of little organs called organelles. Here are some of the examples of organelles. Nucleus, for example, is a control center for the cell. Endoplasmic reticulum serves, also known as ER, serves as a site of chemical reactions and major transport system for proteins. Mitochondria are known as powerhouses of the cell. They produce very important molecules for the cell known as ATP molecules. Molecules that provide energy for most of the biochemical cell processes. As you can see, the animal and plant cells are very similar to each other, for they have similar organelles. The difference is, though, is that plants have chloroplast, organelles that contain green molecules of chlorophyll. These molecules allow plant cells to make their own food from water and carbon dioxide. So the plant cells are making food for the plant. Animal cells are incapable to do so because they do not have chloroplast. This is why we must have already formed organic matter for food. We need to take in food from the environment we live in. This organic matter may be the living or dead tissue of plants or living or dead tissue of animals. For us and the life of other animals, it is necessary that other organisms live or have lived. It is this need which primarily distinguishes a human or other animal from a plant. Human and other animals cannot exist without plants. The plants furnishes all animals with food either directly or indirectly. Suppose we eat a piece of beef as a source of our needed energy. The animal from which the steak was obtained gets its energy from eating green plants or their seeds. These plants use the sun's radiant energy to make food. Hence, we may say that we got our beefsteak indirectly from the sun. And so it is with everything we or any other living creatures eat. All energy stored in form of food may finally be traced to the radiant energy of the sun. But let's go back to the cell organelles. Organelle is the portion of the cell performing a specific function. Organelles are made up by biopolymers or macromolecules. Macro means large, so large biological molecules make up organelles. Examples of organelles are mitochondria, nuclei, chloroplast. I also like to consider ribosomes as an organelle because ribosomes produce one of the most important things for the cell, that is proteins. Without proteins, there will be no cells and there will be no life. Though many textbooks, they shy away from calling ribosomes organelles because ribosomes are not surrounded by a membrane, unlike mitochondria, nuclei, chloroplast, lysosomes, peroxisomes, and other biological structures. Now let's draw a big triangle upside down. Each shelf of this diagram will represent a separate level of organization of living organism, either it is plant, fungus, or animal. According to the well-established cell theory, all living things consist of cells, or at least one cell. And as we established earlier, the cells contain organelles inside them. There are two major cell types on this planet. Prokaryotic cells, that's cells that do not have nuclei, and eukaryotic cells, cells that have nuclei. We mentioned already that nucleus, plural nuclei, is the main control center of eukaryotic cells. Why? Because it contains an informational polymer, a molecule known as deoxyribonucleic acid. You know it as a DNA molecule. Question: how many cell types do you see on this diagram? Two types of cells. Someone without thinking said three. No, two types of cells you see on this diagram. Eukaryotic cells, here it is, animal and plant cells are eukaryotic cells, and here is the prokaryotic cells. Prokaryotic cells are bacteria. So you here see a bacteria. Now, eukaryotic cells, they have true nuclei. Here it is. One, two, one in animal cell and one in the plant cell. Do you see nucleus in the bacterium? No. In the bacterium, you see this area called nucleoid. This is a DNA molecule here. It is not protected by the nuclear membrane. So the cells without the nucleus we call prokaryotic cell. DNA is located in the region called nucleoid. Nucleo means nucleus, oid means something that resembles, in this case, nucleus. Cells make up tissue. Tissue is a group of cells that have similar structure and that function together as a unit. There are four main tissue types, or which say there is four primary tissue types: epithelial tissue, connective tissue, muscle, and nervous tissue. Each is designed for specific functions. Tissue differ from each other in the size and shape of their cells, in the amount and kind of material present between the cells, and in the special functions they prefer to help maintain the body's survival. Here you could see two different types of tissue. The connective tissue is represented as a cartilage, and the nervous tissue. We're going to talk to, you see this tissue under the microscope. We're going to talk about this type of tissue in more details today during the lecture. But for now, we have to say that tissue make up organs. Organ is a group of tissue joined in a structural unit to serve a common functions. I don't doubt that you will give me examples of organs. Kidney is an organ, liver is an organ, heart is an organ, leaf is an organ of a plant. Flower is an organ of a plant. A gallbladder is an organ, a skin is an organ, a bone is an organ. Organs make up organ systems. An organ system is a group of organs arranged in such a way that together they can perform a more complex functions than can any organ alone. Examples are integumentary system, muscular system, nervous system, endocrine system, skeletal system, cardiovascular system, lymphatic system, urinary system, digestive system, respiratory system, male reproductive system, female reproductive system. Organ systems are the most complex units of the body. A system is an organization of varying numbers and kinds of organs arranged so that together these organs can perform complex functions for the body. These organs of the respiratory system permit the air enter the body and travel to the lungs, where the eventual exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide occurs. Organs of the respiratory system include the nose, or the windpipe, or trachea, and the complex series of bronchial tubes that permit passage of air into the substance of the lungs. No one body organ system function entirely independently of other systems. Instead, they are structurally and functionally interrelated and interdependent. It should be noted that each level has fewer units than lower levels. For instance, there are fewer tissues than cells, and there are fewer cells than organelles. Each level also has, in addition to its own complexity, the complexities of all the lower levels. Organ systems make up organism. And I don't think you will have any difficulty to give examples of the organisms. What is an organism? Organism is a living being that has a cellular structure and can independently perform all physiologic function necessary for life. So write down examples of organisms on this level of organization. I wrote mine. I wrote human, butterfly, worm, tree. All of these are organisms. Organisms make up population. Population is a summation of all members of the single species that live in a particular ecosystem and have the capability of interbreeding. For example, all the lions in the savanna make up population. Population tend to live in a particular places or ecosystem. Ecosystem is a geographic area where plants, animals, and other organisms, as well as weather and landscapes, work together to form bubble of life. Ecosystem contains biotic or living parts as well as abiotic factors or non-living parts. Biotic factors include plants, animals, other organisms, and abiotic factors include water, air, soil, rocks. So once again, population is the organism of the same species living in a particular location. When a population coexists with other population of different species, but with similar requirements and all adapted to a certain complex of environmental conditions, a community is formed. A community is a localized aggregation of populations so organized that it is more or less independent of other communities, and so constituted that it is self-sufficient in its energetics and energy transformations. With its organization are different strata of population, each adapted for a particular role in the maintenance of the community. One stratum may be producers, such as plants, which can convert solar energy to chemical energy in plant products. A second stratum is the consumers, which each plant and other animals that live on plants. A third stratum contains decomposers, bacteria and fungi chiefly, which decompose dead organisms and organic debris and release basic chemical substances to be used again by plants. Biological community is all the living things in an area. The community and the non-living environment interact to form an ecologic system or ecosystem. An ecosystem, therefore, is a sum total of the physical and biotic factors operating within the area that includes living organisms and abiotic substances. Because ecosystem includes abiotic factors, I did not include the ecosystem in the hierarchy of life organizations. However, it is useful to keep in mind what is an ecosystem. Numerous biological communities make up biosphere. The biosphere is that thin veil over the earth wherein the wondrous properties of light and water are brought together to permit life. In addition to the land surface area, we must include subterrestrial realms and fresh and marine water as well. In all, we are dealing with lots of square footage, but not much depth. Things cannot live very far above or below the Earth's surface. To be precise, the habitable regions of the Earth lie within a amazingly thin layer of approximately 14 miles. This includes the highest mountains and deepest trenches. If Earth were the size of a basketball, the biosphere would be about the thickness of one coat of paint. The term biosphere was first used by English-Australian scientist Edward Seuss in his 4-volume book named The Face of Earth. In this book, he explained the relations of living things as supported by Earth. Here are good and short definitions for biosphere. Biosphere is the zone of life on Earth. Biosphere is the layer of the Earth where life exists. Or biosphere is the realm of life. So let's identify a biosphere on this very small drawing. Will the life exist in the Earth mantle? I don't think so. How about land and soil? Yes, of course. Water, oh yes, it is there. Air, yes. Besides birds, there is billions of bacterial cells in there, including some algae. How about upper atmosphere? Well, not much life found in there, right? Or any at all, maybe doesn't even exist in some places, right? Of upper atmosphere. So the biosphere would be the land and soil, water, and air. That's what we can call biosphere. We're aware of the basic situation within the atmosphere. It includes a certain amount of water, a rather narrow range of temperatures, sunlight and carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and various minerals. Our space probes have found no other place in the solar system where these conditions exist. A key difference between Earth and other planets then lies in atmospheric composition. It is this atmosphere colliding into a tilted Earth that produces climates and seasons. Without getting into a lengthy discourse on physical geography, I should simply say that the climatic patterns have a great effect on the distribution of life. All right, so let's review what we just covered. We said that atoms make up molecules, inorganic molecules make up of organic compounds make up polymers, and polymers make up organelles. Taking a look at the highest levels of organization, we saw that cells make up tissue, tissue make up organs, organs make up organ systems, and organ system make up the whole organism. Organism can be unicellular, made up of one cell, and organism can be multicellular, made of many cells. But since we are taking in consideration tissue, organs, and organ system, we obviously looking at the multicellular organisms. So we are looking at the highest levels of organization. Organisms make up population. Population make up biological communities, and the sum of all biological communities on our planet called Biosphere. The hierarchically organized matter reveals one of the basic aspects of life, in that it provides the concept of evolution of matter from non-living to the living and gives the meaningful interpretation to the whole problem of the origin of life, which I will discuss in our separate lecture. Now we're going to take a quick look at cell. Keep in mind, this is only an introduction to a topic we will cover later during the course. We will have the whole lecture dedicated to the cells and cell organelles. That lecture is number 10. Cells were discovered by Robert Hooke in 1665. He coined the term cell, suggesting plant structure resembles of honeycomb cells. And here you see two types of different cells: eukaryotic cells, which are animal cells and plant cells, and prokaryotic cell. Prokaryotic cells are bacteria and archaea. About archaea, we're going to talk less in this course. But better remember the difference between prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells. It's always a good idea to draw diagrams. So let's draw diagrams. Now, first, we're going to start drawing eukaryotic cell. As you know, animals, plant, and fungal cells made of eukaryotic cells. And that means that they have what? Nucleus. Here you could see structures that are already drawn for you. The cells itself, cell membrane, right? You could see cell membrane. And you could see the DNA in both prokaryotic and eukaryotic cell. And now we're going to draw nucleus. That's right, because in eukaryotic cells, DNA is protected by a nuclear membrane, and not one, but two. So after you draw one circle around the DNA, you want to draw something like a letter C around. Why letter C around? Because the second membrane is going to expand and form another type of organelle known as ER, or endoplasmic reticulum. We mentioned that already, and you already know the function of this organelle. What do we do next? Next, we're going to draw mitochondria. Easy things to do. You just draw an oval and then a wrinkle membrane inside it. This is a very important organelle because it's produce ATP molecules, as we mentioned earlier. As you could see, only eukaryotic cells have mitochondrium. Does it mean that prokaryotic cells do not make ATP? No. Prokaryotic cells do make ATP, but they use their cell membrane to make this important molecules. But eukaryotic cells using mitochondria to provide itself with an ATP molecules, an energy carrier molecule, right? That actually drives all biochemical and biochemical processes within the cell. Now, what else we want to draw? Now we're going to draw organelle that both prokaryotic cells and eukaryotic cells have. And that is ribosomes. You see, I insist to call this organelles, ribosomes, organelles, even though they do not have membrane around them. As you could see, mitochondria has a membrane around it, and the plasmic reticulum, and the nucleus, but ribosomes don't. But they are very important. These organelles produce proteins, super important for life. Well, super important. It would be impossible to have life on this planet if we didn't have proteins. Proteins do wonderful things for the cells and for the environment. They produce all kinds of things. They're responsible for all kinds of functions within the cell. Now we're going to draw lysosomes. Another organelles that are surrounded by a membrane, unlike ribosomes. And of course, prokaryotic cells do not have lysosomes. You see, great majority of prokaryotic cells do not have any membranous structures within them. Now we're going to take a look at the various eukaryotic cells. Okay, we're not going to mention prokaryotic cells. So we're going to take a look at animal cell, plant cell, and fungal cells. What is similar and what is different between these eukaryotic cells? Well, they all have DNA. So we're going to draw a DNA molecule. There's a symbol for DNA molecule. It doesn't really look like this, right? Just the symbol. Now, then we have to draw nuclear membrane, and not one, but two nuclear membranes and endoplasmic reticulum. You see, animal, plant, and fungal cells, they all have nucleus and endoplasmic reticulum. Now, what we want to put in is mitochondria. You recognize this, right? Both animal, plant, and fungal cells have mitochondria. Now, all these cells also have ribosomes, as I said, super important. Without proteins, there will be no life. And these organelles, ribosomes, make up proteins. Easy enough, right? Circles, ovals, circles, ovals. So what's now? What's next? Lysosomes. We put lysosomes in animal cells. Now, plant cells, what they have very marvelous, incredibly important for the plants and for the lives on Earth organelle. Even though our cells do not have chloroplast, the name of the organelle is chloroplast, our life depends on this, because using these organelles that contains chlorophyll, an incredible molecule that capable capture energy from the sun and produce organic matter out of inorganic matter such as water and carbon dioxide. Practically it makes food. What it does, it makes food for the plants, and then plants become food for animals that actually cannot make its own cells. Our cells do not have chloroplast. And maybe it's a good idea, because if our cells would have chloroplast, then we didn't have to hunt for the food, we don't have to move, we will have to just expose our body to the sun and wait when our cells will make the food. So if we had chloroplast, we actually would turn into plants. Not a good idea, perhaps, right? Personally, I like moving. Plants do move, but they do not move as fast and as much as animals do. Now let's take a look at the fungal plants and at fungal cells and plant cells. Notice they both have something around their cell. Each of the cell of plant and fungal cell surrounded by a structure known as a cell wall. So both plant cells and fungal cells have cell walls. Though these cell walls are made of different material. In plant cells, it's made of cellulose, and in fungal cells, it's made of chitin. Oh, I mispronounced the word. My apologies. Instead of saying chitin, I should have said chitin. So the fungal cells, they surrounded by cell wall made of chitin, not chitin, chitin. Let's take a look at the cells of adipose tissue called adipocytes or adipose cells. Adipose tissue play important role by cushioning the tissue. The adipose cushion is around your eyes, around your kidneys, your heart, your trachea. It is under the skin to insulate you from constantly changing environment. We will talk much more about the tissue in our other lectures. Fat found in large, huge vacuoles of adipose cells, fat cells. It is in liquid form and becomes hard only when the body cools after death. Fat is a good way to store energy because it is relatively light. The most of the plants store energy in form of starch. Starch is heavy. If we animals store energy in form of starch, we will not be able to walk, at least not far. So let's draw organelle called vacuole. Easy thing to do, just a circle, as you see it on this slide. Next, we want to draw a cell membrane around it and thin layer of cytoplasm. You see the vacuole, this organelle that stores fat is so huge, it pushes the cytoplasm on the periphery or on a side, including the nucleus. That's why the nucleus is pushed to the side and the whole cell looks like a signet ring. Often students ask me, what is a signet ring? Well, here it is. This is the signet ring. You see, it looks just like a adipocyte. So we drew here a nucleus that is on the side of the cell. Now what do we want to put inside the nucleus? You all said DNA. DNA, it's correct. Deoxyribonucleic acid, the informational polymer, right, is right there, pushed to the periphery. In most of the cells, nucleus usually on the middle of the cell. But here it is on the periphery, or on the side, we can say. Here you see section of the adipose tissue under the microscope. So that's how it looks under the microscope. And that's true. You see very thin cytoplasm, right, on the periphery of the cell. Here you could see the nucleus, nuclei, 1, nuclei, 2, 3, right, 4, here nuclei. So exactly what we were drawing. We drew the single cell. Here is a bunch of cells, one next to each other. This is a type of a connective tissue. Adipose tissue is type of connective tissue. But unlike other connective tissue, cells in adipose tissue located next to each other. Usually in connective tissue, cells are away from each other. They emerge into a matrix, not in adipose tissue though. And here you see a drawing, a diagram of adipose tissue. I'm showing you all of this because during biology classes, either it is general biology or human biology, students very often make diagrams. They draw cells during their labs. And then labeling, of course. Quite often students forget to label. Don't you ever forget this, right? It's always good to label structures that you diagram. Not as an example of another type of eukaryotic cell, animal cell, we want to draw a red blood cell. Let's do it together. Circle. Red blood cells are circular cells. And that's what you see, a top view, a circle. But red blood cells, they have a biconcave shape. So therefore, they are tapped at the middle. If we look from the side view, you will be able to understand what I mean. You see, that's how they tapped in the middle. And of course, we want to make them red because red blood cells contain hemoglobin molecules, and hemoglobin molecule right in the middle has an atom of iron bounded to other parts of the molecule. There is one very interesting thing about red blood cells. You see, red blood cells, when they mature, they dump out their nuclei. Why? Well, because red blood cells is so preoccupied to get as much hemoglobin molecules as possible in there. Hemoglobin molecules are very important. They bind to oxygen, and that's how red blood cells deliver oxygen throughout the body. So they're dumping out the nuclei. And because of this, the lifespan of red blood cell is not that long. Only 120 days. After 120 days, red blood cells die because they become worn out, and since they do not have nucleus that has DNA molecule with all the instruction how to repair itself, the cells become destroyed within the body. Red blood cells constantly produced in our body. Which organs they are produced in? Don't say the heart, as some of my students say. Where? In the bones. Red blood cells produced in the bones, in the red bone marrow, in the bones of the axial skeleton. We will talk about this when we will actually cover the skeletal system, if we will have time during the general biology course. We will talk more about it in our human biology course, though. Mostly human biology course, yes. Now we want to take a look at the bone tissue under the microscope. It would be very hard to see a bone cells. They emerge in a hard matrix within the structure, structural and functional unit of a bone known as Haversian system or osteon. First, we want to draw a blood capillary because that's where the blood bone cells take in the food from, like any other cells in our body, right? From the blood. Blood delivers nutrients to the cells. So here it is. And then calcified matrix we want to draw. One onion ring after another. And there is a little orifices in between each of the onion ring, calcified onion ring. We shouldn't call it an onion ring. It has a name. It's called concentric lamella. Lamella is a plural, right? Concentric, we see concentric lamella right here with little tiny orifices in between. In those orifices, we find the bone cells called osteocytes. So they're inside of these orifices, known in Latin as lacuna. Lacuna in Latin means little lake. But I like the word orifice better because bone cells, they do a lot of work in their places. Now, since they have to get food, there is canaliculi, little canals that deliver the food to the orifices, to osteocytes. You see, they're all connected to the central blood vessel there, right in the middle, large circle, a blood vessel. So the food goes through these canals, tiny canals known as canaliculi. Between the rings of matrix, the bone cells, osteocytes, are located in spaces called lacunae. Osteocytes are the longest living bone cells, make up 90 to 95% of cells in bone tissue. Small channels, canaliculi, radiate from the lacunae to the central canal to provide passageways through the hard matrix. The concentric lamellae are like tubes of different size fitting inside each other to make an osteon, or another word for osteon is Haversian system. The osteon consists of central canal called osteonic Haversian canal, which is surrounded by concentric rings, lamellae of matrix. And that's how bone tissue looks under the microscope. Everything we draw is there, right? Here you could see the blood vessel. Here is lacuna, the dark ones, dark spots in there, right? You see concentric lamella one after another. And you see, of course, canaliculi. Look at here, little canals. They're all there. We put them on our diagram. So what we looked so far, we looked at the examples of some of the eukaryotic cells. There is many more cells that we're going to look at and discuss during this course. This is just few of them, just to give you an idea about how diverse the cells might be. Now what we're going to take a look, we're going to look at the tissue. Remember we said cells make up tissue, and there is how many types of tissue? 4. primary types of tissue: epithelial tissue, connective tissue, then muscular tissue, and nervous tissue. Let's start with epithelial tissue first. Epithelial tissue covers surfaces. Epithelial tissues are widespread throughout the body. They form the covering of all body surfaces, line body cavities, and hollow organs, and are the major tissue in glands. They perform a variety of functions that include protection, secretion, absorption, excretion, filtration, diffusion, and sensory reception. Because epithelial cells are packed close together with little or no intercellular material between them, they form continuous sheets that contain no blood vessels. Epithelial tissue classified according to the shape and arrangement of the cells it's made of. According to the shapes, there is squamous cells, cuboidal cells, and columnar cells. Well, squamous cells are flat-like and scale-like cells. Cuboidal, well, the word speaks for itself, cube-like shape. And columnar, those cells higher than they are wide. Now, according to arrangement of the cells, it could be a simple layer of the cell or single layer of the cells, and then we refer to the epithelium as a simple epithelial. It could be simple squamous epithelium, simple cuboidal epithelium, or simple columnar epithelium. It also could be arranged in several layers. So, if it's more than one layer, we refer to the epithelium as a stratified epithelium, and it could be squamous stratified epithelium or cuboidal stratified epithelium. Stratified columnar epithelium is a rare type of epithelial tissue composed of column-shaped cells on the top of double layer of somewhat cuboidal cells. It is found in the conjunctiva, pharynx, anus, and male urethra. It's also found in embryo. Pseudostratified columnar epithelia are tissues formed by a single layer of the cells that give the appearance of being made of multiple layers, especially when seen in a cross-section. The nuclei of these epithelial cells are at different levels, leading to the illusion of being stratified. There is another type of epithelium known as transitional epithelial. In this epithelial, there is several layers of cells of differing shapes. Structure determines the function. For example, simple squamous epithelium consists of a single layer of scale-like cells. Because of its structure, substances can readily pass through simple squamous epithelium, making absorption its special function. Stratified squamous epithelium consists of several layers of closely packed cells, an arrangement that makes its tissue a specialist at protection. Stratified transitional epithelium is typically found in body areas that are subject to stress and must be able to stretch, such as walls of the urinary bladder. In many instances, up to 10 layers of cuboidal shaped cells of varying size are present in the absence of stretching. When stretching occurs, the epithelial sheets expand, the number of the cell layers decreases, and the cell shape changes from cuboidal to squamous in appearance. This fact that transitional epithelium has this ability keeps the bladder wall from tearing under the pressures of stretching. Now we're going to go over the most abundant and widely distributed type of tissue in the body. It is connective tissue. It exists in more varied forms than any other tissue types. It is found in skin, membranes, muscles, bones, nerves, and all internal organs. Connective tissue differs from epithelial tissue in the arrangement and variety of its cells and in amount of kinds of intercellular material called matrix found between its cells. Besides the relatively few cells that are embedded in the matrix of most types of connective tissue, varying numbers of kind of fibers are also present. When I say a fiber, I mean a thread or structure resembling of a thread. Has nothing to do with a dietary fiber. It is the structural quality and appearances of the matrix and fibers that determine the qualities of each type of connective tissue. The matrix of blood, for example, is liquid, but the other type of connective tissue, such as cartilage, have a consistency of a firm rubber or plastic-like. The matrix of bone is hard and rigid. Also, the matrix of connective tissues, such as tendons and ligaments, is strong and flexible. Blood is a type of connective tissue. It is a bodily fluid that consists of red blood cells, or another word for them is erythrocytes, and that's how I want you to remember it. White blood cells, and the college name for them is leukocytes, and platelets. Another word for platelets is thrombocytes. And also it consists of a liquid matrix called plasma. And here is the functions of the blood. It supplies oxygen to the cells and tissue. It supplies nutrients to cells. It removes waste products. And it defends us from infections. Another example of connective tissue is the bone tissue. Bone tissue makes most of the bones. Bone is the rigid organ that makes up part of the vertebral skeleton. And bone of the function includes structural support, protection of viscera. Another word for viscera is internal organs, but the better to say viscera, easier and quicker. Muscle attachment site, blood formation. Yes, blood is made in the bone. Please remember this. Mineral storage. Also, what bones do is they trap some dangerous chemicals that we expose through the environment. Cartilage, or in other words, gristle, is a type of connective tissue. It makes an entire skeleton of sharks. Yes, shark's skeleton is not made of bones, it's made of gristle or cartilage. Where in human body do we find cartilage? Well, during the first months of pregnancy, the skeleton of a human embryo is made entirely of cartilage. The minerals cause the cartilage to harden into the bone later on. Here you could see the view of 16-week-old human fetus. The process of turning cartilage into bone continues through birth and into the teenage years until most of our skeleton has become bone. Where do we find cartilage in adult human organism? In the places where two bones meet. How do we call these places? Joints. Here is a very interesting joint called a symphysis. As you could see, it consists of intervertebral disc in between the vertebra. Also, this joint known as fibrocartilaginous joint. We find cartilage in rib cage. Costal cartilages, here they are, colored blue. Your voice box is made of cartilage. Another good word to use for voice box is larynx. Where else do we find cartilage? How about nose, ears? Let's move on with another example of connective tissue, and that would be tendons and ligaments. Tendons bind muscle to bone, and the ligaments bind bone to bone. Please remember this. This is a very durable tissue, and this is what sticks in between your teeth when you eat meat. So far, we were talking about two types of primary tissue, epithelial tissue and connective tissue. Looking at the pictures below, can you tell the major difference between these types of tissue? A striking difference. What is it? You see that the epithelial tissue has a very little of intracellular material in between cells. The cells of epithelial tissue are one next to each other, while in connective tissue, cells are away from each other. They emerge into matrix. Either it is a liquid matrix in case with blood, or hard matrix in case with bone. In order to remember this better, let's make diagrams. epithelial tissue and connective tissue. This is not a very hard drawing to do, very easy. So let's put one line after another. And now let's draw perpendicular lines to it. What we want to draw now? Nuclei. And now let's label it. Never forget to label your diagrams. Labeling is very important. So here's a nuclei we labeled. Now, cell membrane, right, we want to label, and cytoplasm. Cytoplasm, everything that is inside the cell we call cytoplasm. It consists of cell organelles, except the nucleus, and cytosol. Cytosol is jelly-like substance where organelles are emerged. So now let's work on connective tissue, which would be even easier. So all you have to do, put some cells in it, and in between, you want to label matrix. Now we're going to take a look at another type of tissue called muscle tissue. There are three types of muscle tissue. That is skeletal muscles. That's what we call bulk of our flesh, is a skeletal muscles that attach to our skeleton. Smooth muscles we find in the walls of our organs. Like, for example, on this picture, you see esophagus, and smooth muscles propel the bolus, the ball of food, from our mouth down to our stomach. So this type of muscle we call smooth muscles. We find them in our stomach, in our intestines. And the third type of muscle is cardiac muscle. As word implies, that's what makes up pump of our body, blood pump of our body, the organ called heart. Skeletal muscles are connected to bones by a special form of connective tissue called tendons. Skeletal muscles are made of individual fibers. Now, when we talk about skeletal muscles and you hear fibers, you think of muscle cell. Fiber is another word for muscle cell. Has nothing to do with a dietary fiber and cellulose in plant cells, okay? So fiber is skeletal muscle. Skeletal muscle cell. Here is how skeletal muscle cells look under the microscope. Skeletal muscles are also called striated muscles because the muscle fibers have light and dark crossbands. They are voluntary muscles because we can choose when and how to move them. We can go to gym and exercise to improve their performance, strength, shape, and appearance. A person's large muscles are made up of thousands of fibers. Muscles contract when they are stimulated by a nerve impulse. Smooth muscle is a type of involuntary muscle. We cannot contract consciously those muscles. We find smooth muscles in our digestive system, in our esophagus, intestines. We find smooth muscles in our blood vessels. Seeing the view under the microscope, you probably notice that smooth muscle is not striated. Smooth muscle has a spindle shape and inside contains a single central nucleus, unlike skeletal muscle. Skeletal muscle is multinucleated. Smooth muscle contracts more slowly than does skeletal muscle. Smooth muscles are responsible for moving food through a gastrointestinal tract. Peristalsis is a series of wave-like muscle contractions that move food through the digestive tract. It starts in the esophagus, where strong wave-like motions of the smooth muscles move bolus of swallowed food to the stomach. This explains why we can indeed consume the food hanging upside down. Peristaltic waves are so effective that you can consume an entire meal while hanging upside down, though I warn you not to do so, because I am afraid some of you might choke to death. So let's keep in mind that things might go wrong in some instances. The heart is made of striated muscle called cardiac muscle. Heart muscle is striated but not as clearly as skeletal muscle. As you can see from this slide, cardiac muscle is branching cells. They are connected to each other via complex structures called intercalated discs. A question: can you control your heartbeat? No. Conclusion: cardiac muscle are another type of involuntary muscles. We cannot consciously control its contractions. All the muscle fibers in our heart contract at the same time, and all of them relax at the same time. Cardiac muscle cells beat together because of the sinoatrial node, which sends electrical nerve impulses throughout the heart. The most curious feature of the cardiac muscle is that the contractions itself and its rhythmicity are inherited in the muscle cells of the heart. The heart, in other words, is capable of beating without outside regulation. This is dramatically illustrated in transplanted hearts, which sometimes go on beating for many years with no nerve connection whatever. I am not saying, though, that the normal heart is functionally isolated, beating merely away independently of the rest of the body. The heart is in fact greatly affected by external environments and even by emotions. Heart rate can be fine-tuned by the nervous system and endocrine system. Now let's summarize everything we learned about muscle tissue. There are three types of muscle tissue: skeletal muscle tissue, cardiac muscle tissue, and smooth muscle tissue. The skeletal muscle cells are one of the longest cells in the body. Some of them can be a half-meter long. Shape of the skeletal muscles is cylindrical or fiber-like. This is why we refer to skeletal muscle cells as a muscle fiber or just a fiber. Unlike cells of cardiac and smooth muscles, the skeletal muscle cells are multinucleated. One of the most important characteristics is that skeletal muscle cells are striated. They are voluntary. Cardiac muscle cells are branch cells. They are uninucleated, one nucleus per cell. Like skeletal muscle cells, they are striated, though their striations are not as prominent and not as well visible as in skeletal muscle cells. As you know, they are not voluntary. They have special feature, and that is intercalated discs, complex structures that connect adjacent cardiac muscle cells. Intercalated discs represent undulating double membrane where two cells are tightly bound together. Smooth muscles have a fusiform or spindle-shaped form. They are uninucleated. They are not striated cells. And like cardiac muscle cells, they are not under voluntary control. Thus, we finish with characteristic of muscle tissue. Let's take a look at another primary type of tissue. The peculiar kind of cells that gives us information about our external and internal environment and then send signals to the body comprise the nervous tissue. Neurons are cells of nervous tissue. The special quality of neurons is that they are irritable, a physical, not an emotional state. In other words, they can react to the environmental stimuli in a very specific way. Some detect light, some color, others pressures, and so forth. Some neurons involved in transmission or other decoding environmental stimuli. Neurons in most animals, however, basically behave very similar. So let's consider in general terms how neuron works. Basically, all neurons have dendrites, 3 regions. Well, the word dendrite means 3. This part of the neuron is basically highly branched. The dendrite receives stimuli either from the environment or from other neurons. The cell body contains the nucleus and most of the usual organelles, such as Endoplasmic Reticulum, Mitochondria, and Ribosomes. The axon is the trunk of the neuron. Axons may be very long. In humans, they range from up to 3 feet long, such as those that run from the base of the spine down to the leg. Axon transmit impulses away from the cell body. The axon terminates in the synaptic junction, and this joins or synapses with other neurons or with cells of effector organs such as muscles or glands. The neural impulse is transmits both chemically and electrically. The impulse is possible because of the peculiar cell membrane has the ability to pump certain molecules that bear electrical charges outside of the cell, while at the same time it allows other charged particles to move into the interior of the cell, thus setting up different concentrations of chemical outside and inside. As a result of such shifts, the fluid outside the neuron bears the opposite electrical charge from that inside the cell. Another part of the nervous tissue are numerous glial cells, also called neuroglia, are cells which are non-neural. These cells provide physical and metabolic support to neurons, including neuronal insulation, communication, protection, and nutrient and waste transport. We will go over other cells in our future lectures. On the slide, you see examples of oligodendrocytes. They are type of the neuroglia whose main functions are to provide support and insulation to axons of the central nervous system, brain, and spinal cord. Microglial cells are specialized macrophages of the central nervous system. These cells mediate immune responses by cleaning clear cellular debris and dead neurons from nervous tissue through the process of phagocytosis, cellular eating. They are literally engulf dead neurons and debris. So far, we not only covered hierarchy of organization of living things, but we also briefly examined 2 types of cells, prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells, and 4 primary types of tissue: epithelial tissue, connective tissue, muscle tissue, and nervous tissue. This tissue made up by eukaryotic cells. In 1978, American microbiologist and biophysicist Carl Weiss proposed to divide all living things into 3 domains because of their differences in chemical composition. Here are those 3 groups, or as Carl Weiss called them, domains. Now, eukaryotic cells form domain eukarya. What belongs to this domain? You can tell me. What? Animals, plants, fungi, and protists. Prokaryotic cells form 2 domains, bacteria and archaea. Both bacteria and archaea are unicellular organisms. They do not contain nucleus or membrane-bound organelles, and they reproduce asexually. But there are important differences that put them in 2 separate categories. Here they are. Their cell walls and cell membranes are different, have different chemical composition. The proteins, enzymes, the genetic code in archaea are different from the enzymes that read the genetic code in bacteria. There are no archaea that is capable of causing diseases in human, animals, and plants, while some bacterial species and their strains are capable of causing various diseases in plants, animals, and humans. There are no disease-causing archaea, or in other words, there is no pathogenic archaea have been identified. So there are general assumptions that archaeal pathogens do not exist. Unique archaeal characteristics include the ability to live in extremely hot or chemically aggressive environments, and they can be found across the Earth. Those archaea that live in extreme habitats such as hot springs and deep sea vents are called extremophiles. Okay, let's do some review. We learned that in animals and humans, eukaryotic cells make up 4 primary types of tissue: epithelial tissue, connective tissue, muscle tissue, and nervous tissue. Let's see if you remember this material. Question to you. What are the 3 types of muscle tissue? Skeletal muscles, smooth muscles, and cardiac muscles. Which muscles move food through your digestive system? Smooth muscles. Which muscles pump blood? Cardiac muscles. If you were to play piano, what type of muscle tissue would be most directly involved? Skeletal muscles. What tissue is the skeleton of newborn baby mainly composed of? Connective tissue, specifically cartilage. What is the smallest structural and functional unit of the nervous system? Neuron. What is the structural and functional unit of a bone? Haversian system. What type of tissue generates electrochemical impulses? Nervous tissue. What are the main characteristics of the nervous tissue? Irritability and conductivity. What are the main characteristics of the muscle tissue? Contractility and irritability. And now try to identify types of primary tissue on this slide. What is A? What is B? And what is C? A is epithelial tissue. And B is connective tissue. What type of connective tissue? Adipose tissue, fat tissue, made of adipose cells, fat cells. C is skeletal muscle. Meat, flesh, is made up of skeletal muscles, muscles that attach to a skeleton, either human or other animal. As you learn from this lecture, humans have the same chemical composition as other animals. We humans are made up of cells very similar to those of other animals. Human muscle, nerve, and blood cells are similar in structure and function of the amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals. Even organ system and physical characteristics similar to many other animals, such as worms, grasshoppers, and pigs. All of them break down a large food molecules using digestive system, and they also have systems that circulate blood. Pig hearts are so similar to human hearts that they could be used for transplants. We humans reproduce sexually, and so plants, fish, amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals, and we all, including animals, plants, bacteria, and even archaea, are using the same kind of genetic information. We all use DNA as our genetic material. In our second part of the lecture, I will go over the characteristics of living things. That is what makes living things different from non-living things. I know it might sound simple, but as you will learn, it could be difficult to have consensus on such characteristics. For example, are viruses living or non-living things?